They pursued the Deathworld girl after class. By sunrise, every hunter had disappeared. My claws were already out before the bell finished ringing. That is the first thing you should know about me. I am Stor, youngest of my hunting line, and on the night I am about to describe, I made the worst decision of my life by simply staying quiet when I should have spoken. It started with a smell, or rather, the absence of one. Every creature on this campus carried fear the way other species carry perfume. It clung to them, thick and sweet, whenever my pack walked past. The soft-skinned exchange students from the outer colonies flinched when Vorn so much as flexed his shoulder blades. The insectoid transfers from Hurrix folded their antennae flat and scurried the other direction. Fear was currency here, and my pack collected it the way other students collected grades. Then the new girl arrived, and the currency stopped working. Her name was Nora Whitfield. She sat 2 rows behind me in advanced xenobiology, always early, always quiet, always writing in a small paper notebook instead of using a tablet like everyone else. She had light brown hair pulled back in a simple knot, plain clothes that never changed style, and eyes the color of storm water. Nothing about her appearance suggested danger. That was the first mistake every one of us made, and none of us realized it was a mistake until it no longer mattered. Vihorn noticed her on the 3rd day. "She does not smell right," he said, leaning against the lockers with his arms crossed, watching her walk past without so much as glancing at him. "She smells like nothing," I said. "Maybe her species does not sweat fear the way we track it." "Every species fears something," Roshan said. "We simply have not found her fear yet." That should have been the end of it. A passing comment, forgotten by lunch, but Varn was the pack leader for a reason, and once an idea took root in him, it grew roots of its own, deep and stubborn, until the whole pack was tangled in it. By the end of the 1st week, testing Nora Whitfield had become a kind of hobby for him. He would drop his heavy textbooks near her seat, letting them slam against the floor loud enough to make the windows rattle. Most students jumped. She simply looked down, picked up whichever book had slid closest to her foot, and handed it back to him without a word. He tried standing too close to her in the hallway, using the full height advantage our species carries over most bipedal races. Students twice her size had backed away from that posture before. She stepped around him, the same way you might step around a slow-moving cart, and kept walking to class. He even tried baring his teeth at her once, during a group project when the teacher's back was turned. It was a display meant to trigger something primal, something buried in the base of every prey animal's brain. I watched her reaction closely, expecting anything from a flinch to a scream. She looked at his teeth, tilted her head slightly, the way you might study an interesting rock formation, and said, "You should get that back molar checked. It looks chipped." Then she returned to her notes. Vorn did not speak for the rest of that class period. I had never seen him so quiet. That night, in the dormitory common room, the pack gathered the way we always did after classes, sprawled across the low seating with drinks in hand, replaying the events of the day the way other students might replay a game. Sella, second in command and sharpest-tongued among us, was the one who said what we had all been thinking. "She is not brave," Sella said. "She simply does not understand what we are." "She understands," argued Drakic, the largest of us, built like a small transport vehicle. "She has seen our files." "Everyone has seen our files." "Then she is either very foolish," Sella said, "or she knows something we do not." Vehorn set down his cup. The metal made a soft sound against the table, and everyone in the room quieted the way they always did when he was about to speak with real intention. "We have hunted creatures on 11 worlds," he said. "We have tracked prey through storms, through darkness, through terrain that would kill most travelers within a day, and a single transfer student, barely out of her 1st year of interstellar schooling, walks past us like we are furniture." "So what do you propose?" Sella asked. "A lesson," Vorshun said. "Nothing that breaks any rule of this academy. We follow her after class tomorrow. We let her see exactly how far behind us she truly is. By the time we are finished, she will understand what fear should feel like. I remember the exact moment I should have argued. I remember opening my mouth, the beginning of a sentence sitting right behind my teeth, something like, maybe we should leave her alone, or what if there is a reason she does not react the way we expect. I remember looking around the room instead, at Drake nodding along, at Sella already smiling with anticipation, at Torvek and Ilsara murmuring agreement from the corner. I remember closing my mouth instead of speaking. I told myself it was because arguing with Vorn rarely worked. I told myself it was because a little bit of intimidation never actually hurt anyone. Not really. Not in any lasting way. I told myself several comfortable lies that night, and every single one of them fell apart before the following sunrise. The next day passed the way ordinary days pass, which somehow made everything worse in hindsight. Nora Whitfield attended her morning classes. She ate lunch alone at a table near the far windows, reading from her paper notebook while the rest of the courtyard buzzed with noise. She raised her hand twice during afternoon lecture, both times giving answers so precise that even the professor paused before responding. I watched her more closely than I had before, searching for whatever secret Sella suspected she was hiding. I found nothing unusual. She moved efficiently, never wasting motion, but plenty of disciplined students moved that way. Her clothing was simple, practical, nothing that suggested hidden equipment or unusual strength. Her hands showed calluses along the palms, the kind you might get from manual labor or sustained physical training, but that alone meant little. Many species trained their bodies for reasons that had nothing to do with fighting. By the final bell, my nerves had settled into a low, steady hum of anticipation rather than dread. This was routine for my pack. We had performed similar demonstrations before, always ending the same way, with some frightened student learning to keep a respectful distance from creatures who ranked near the top of every predatory index in the known systems. I did not yet understand that Nora Whitfield came from a place that did not appear on any predatory index at all, because the scientists who built those charts had never truly understood what they were looking at when they studied her homeworld. I did not understand that yet. By sunrise, I would understand everything, and by then it would already be far too late for 4 of my closest packmates. The final bell rang through the corridors at exactly the same volume it rang every single day, and yet something about the sound felt different to me. Sharper, somehow. Like a blade being drawn rather than a chime marking the end of lessons. Nora Whitfield gathered her notebook, slid it into a canvas bag worn soft with use, and walked out through the east entrance, the way she always did, taking the long path that wound past the athletic fields and down toward the transit station near the edge of campus. Vorn was already waiting by the doorway when I stepped out into the afternoon light, Sella beside him, Drake cracking his knuckles with a sound like breaking branches, Torvek and Ilsara flanking the group with the loose, easy posture of predators who had never once needed to worry about their own safety. "There she is," Vorn said quietly, watching her small figure grow smaller down the path. "Let us go teach the Deathworld girl a lesson she will remember for the rest of her life." None of us knew yet how true those words would turn out to be, or how differently the lesson would unfold from anything we imagined as we fell into step behind her, moving through the golden afternoon light, like shadows finally given permission to hunt. The path along the athletic fields narrowed into a tree-lined walkway before opening onto the wide streets that led toward the transit station, and it was there, beneath the long shadows of the afternoon sun, that I first noticed something strange about the way Nora Whitfield moved. She did not walk like someone unaware of being followed. She walked like someone who had counted us the moment we stepped through the east doorway and had simply decided we were not yet worth acknowledging. Her pace never changed. She did not glance over her shoulder the way frightened prey almost always does, that quick nervous check that gives away exactly how much fear has taken hold. She did not speed up, she did not slow down. She moved with the same steady, efficient rhythm she used crossing the quad between classes. her canvas bag resting against her hip, her free hand occasionally brushing against the low hedges lining the path as though she were simply enjoying an ordinary walk home. "She knows we are here," Sella murmured, low enough that only the pack could hear. "Of course she knows," Vorn said. "We are not trying to be subtle. We want her to know." Drake chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through his massive chest. "Then why is she not running?" Nobody answered him, because nobody had a good answer, and the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have for something so small. We followed her past the transit station, which surprised me, since I had assumed that was her destination. Instead, she continued walking, taking a side street that ran along the edge of the maintenance district, an older part of the campus grounds where the buildings grew quieter and the streetlights stood farther apart. Warehouses used for storing agricultural equipment lined one side of the road, their metal walls dulled with age, while the other side opened onto a stretch of undeveloped land the university had never gotten around to building on. It was, I would later realize, an almost perfect place for what Vorn had planned. Few students walked this route, few cameras covered this stretch of ground. Whether Nora Whitfield chose this path by habit or by design, I could not say, but either way, it played directly into what my pack wanted. "Time to get her attention," Warhorn said, and picked up his pace. The rest of us fell into formation without needing instruction, spreading into a loose crescent behind her, the same shape we used when tracking creatures across open terrain on hunting expeditions. It was efficient. It was practiced. It had worked against far more dangerous prey than a single unarmed transfer student. Vorn closed the distance first, his long strides eating up the space between them until he walked only a few paces behind her, close enough that any ordinary person would have felt his presence pressing against their back like a physical weight. Nora Whitfield finally slowed. Not from fear. I understood that immediately, even before she turned around, because her heartbeat had not changed at all. I could hear it, steady and unhurried, the same rhythm it had carried since the final bell rang. She slowed the way someone slows when they have simply decided a conversation is worth having. She turned to face us, her canvas bag still resting against her hip, her expression calm in a way that made the fine hairs along my arms stand upright. "You have been following me for 11 minutes, she said, her voice pleasant, almost conversational. "I was starting to wonder when you would say something." Vorn's confidence flickered, just slightly, a small hitch in his posture that I doubt anyone but a fellow predator would have noticed. He recovered quickly, drawing himself up to his full height, using the natural advantage our species carried in size and presence. "You should be afraid," he said. "Should I?" Nora Whitfield asked, tilting her head the same way she had in the classroom when he bared his teeth at her. "Why?" "Because everything about what we are tells you that you should be," Vorn said. "Our species has topped predatory rankings across 6 settled systems. Our ancestors hunted creatures 3 times our size, using nothing but bare hands and patience. You are young, unarmed, and outnumbered 5 to 1 on an empty street at the edge of a nearly abandoned district." Nora Whitfield considered this for a moment, glancing briefly at each of us in turn. Sella, Drake, Torvek, Ilsara, myself, as though she were taking inventory rather than assessing a threat. "That is a lot of statistics," she said finally, "but statistics only tell you what usually happens. They do not tell you what is happening right now." "And what is happening right now?" Sella asked, stepping forward with a low, dangerous smile. "Right now," Nora Whitfield said, 5 people from a species with a long and impressive hunting history are standing in an empty street, congratulating themselves on cornering someone they know almost nothing about." The words hung in the cooling evening air longer than they should have, and something about her tone, calm and almost gentle, unsettled me more than any threat could have. I glanced at Drake, expecting him to laugh off her words the way he laughed off most things, but even he had gone quiet, his eyes narrowed with something I did not want to name as caution. Vorn, however, was not so easily unsettled. He had built his entire reputation on never backing down, and backing down now, in front of the pack, would have cost him something he valued more than his own safety. "You speak with confidence for someone who has never seen what we can do," he said. "You are right," Nora Whitfield said. "I have not seen it, but I would guess you have never seen what I can do either." "Then perhaps it is time we both found out," Vahorn said, and took another step forward. I felt the shift in the air the moment his weight moved onto his front leg, the subtle change in posture that always preceded a lunge among my kind, a signal so ingrained in our biology that even young hunters learn to read it before they learn to walk properly. My instincts screamed at me to move, to join the pack in the coordinated rush that had ended 100 hunts successfully before this one. But something held me back. Perhaps it was the stillness in Nora Whitfield's stance, the complete absence of the frantic, scattered energy that fear usually produced in prey animals. Perhaps it was the way her weight had already shifted onto the balls of her feet, evenly balanced, ready, in a manner that had nothing to do with fleeing and everything to do with something else entirely. Or perhaps it was simply the small, quiet voice in the back of my mind, the one I had ignored the previous night in the common room, finally growing loud enough that I could not pretend not to hear it. That voice was telling me, very clearly, that we had made a terrible mistake. "Vivhorn," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Maybe we should—" "Quiet, Kestara," Vivhorn snapped, not even glancing back at me. His eyes stayed locked on Nora Whitfield, who had not moved, had not spoken, had simply watched him with that same unhurried patience, as though waiting for him to finish deciding something she had already decided herself several minutes ago. "Last chance," she said softly. "Turn around. Go back to your dormitory. Forget you ever noticed me." "And if we do not?" Sella asked, circling slightly to the left, beginning the pincer movement the pack had practiced 100 times before. Nora Whitfield's storm-gray eyes moved across each of us one final time, slow and deliberate, the way you might look at a room you were about to leave and never see again. "Then you should know," she said, "that where I come from, we do not really have predators anymore. Not the kind that survive to pass on their instincts anyway. We only have the descendants of the ones who learned, a very long time ago, exactly how to answer when something decided to hunt them." The streetlights along the edge of the maintenance district flickered once, an old electrical fault the campus maintenance crew had never quite repaired, and in that brief flicker of darkness, something in Nora Whitfield's posture changed. It was subtle, it was almost invisible. But every predatory instinct in my body recognized it instantly, the same way a smaller animal recognizes the shift in a larger one just before it strikes. She was not preparing to run. She was preparing to finish this before it had properly begun. "Enough talking," Vahorn said, and lunged. What happened in the next several seconds would replay in my mind every single night for years afterward, fragmented and disjointed, the way memories become when the body floods itself with too much adrenaline too quickly for the mind to properly record events in order. I remember Vahorn's shape moving forward with predatory speed that had never once failed him against any creature he had chosen to hunt. I remember Nora Whitfield's own movement, smaller, quieter, almost gentle by comparison. And I remember Vahorn's body meeting the ground with a sound I had never heard a member of my own pack make before. I want to be clear about something before I continue, because it matters more than anything else in this account. Nora Whitfield never struck first. Vahorn lunged, and she simply was not where his lunge expected her to be, a small step to the side that looked almost lazy, almost effortless, and yet somehow placed her exactly where his own momentum became a weapon against him rather than for him. He hit the pavement hard enough that the sound echoed off the warehouse walls, a heavy, flat impact that silenced every other noise on that quiet street. For a long moment, nobody moved. Vahorn lay still, stunned, the wind driven from his lungs, and the rest of the pack stood frozen in a kind of disbelief that I still remember more clearly than almost anything else from that night. Then Sella moved. She was faster than Vhorn, more precise, trained in close combat techniques that had won her 3 regional tournaments before we ever left our homeworld for this academy. She did not lunge the way Vhorn had. She approached with careful, measured steps, the way a true hunter approaches wounded prey, testing distance, watching for openings. Nora Whitfield watched her come with the same calm patience she had shown the entire encounter, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing slow and even. When Sella finally struck, a quick combination aimed at closing distance and controlling position, Nora Whitfield's response was so economical that I almost missed it entirely. A shift of weight, a redirection of force rather than a direct answer to it. Sella's own strength, turned back against her own balance, sent her stumbling past Nora Whitfield entirely, arms windmilling as she fought to stay upright. She did not stay upright for long. I heard Dryak growl beside me, a deep sound that vibrated through the ground itself, and before I could say anything, before I could even form the thought that might have stopped him, he charged forward with the full weight of his massive frame behind him, a tactic that had ended encounters instantly on every world we had ever hunted together. Nora Whitfield did not try to match his strength. That would have been foolish against someone his size, and whatever else she was clearly not foolish. Instead, she used his own charge against him, the same principle she had used against Sella, but applied with far greater force, redirecting his momentum at the last possible moment, so that his own considerable mass carried him past her and directly into the metal wall of the nearest warehouse. The sound of that impact still visits me sometimes, in the quiet moments just before sleep. Drak did not get up. Kes Thara, Torvek said beside me, his voice tight with something I had never heard from him before, something that might have been the beginning of fear. This is not right. This should not be happening. I could not answer him, because I had no answer to give. Everything I understood about the world, every lesson passed down through generations of my hunting lineage, every ranking and statistic and historical record about my species' place near the top of known predatory hierarchies, all of it was crumbling in real time on an empty street at the edge of campus, undone by a quiet transfer student who took notes in a paper notebook and asked questions during lecture. Ilsara broke first, not toward Nora Whitfield, but away from her, turning to run back the direction we had come. I do not blame her for that decision. I have thought about it many times since, and I believe it may have been the only reasonable choice any of us made that entire evening. She did not get far. I will not describe exactly what happened to Ilsara, because I did not see it clearly myself. My attention divided between Torvek's rising panic beside me and the strange, terrible calm radiating from Nora Whitfield as she turned to address the remaining threat. What I can say is that Ilsara's footsteps stopped sooner than they should have, and when I looked for her afterward, in the chaos and confusion that followed, I could not find her anywhere on that street. Torvek stood his ground, though I could smell the change in him now, the fear finally breaking through the confident predator he had been only minutes before. He was our best tracker, patient and methodical, someone who preferred careful planning over direct confrontation. Direct confrontation was exactly what he now faced, and it showed in the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. "Please," he said, and I had never heard that word from Torvek before. Not once, not in all the time I had known him. "We will leave. We will not bother you again." Nora Whitfield studied him for a long moment, and something in her expression softened, just slightly, just enough that I allowed myself a small, foolish hope that this might end without further harm. "I believe you," she said, "but you should have thought of that before you followed me down an empty street." What happened next happened quickly, quiet and controlled, nothing like the chaotic violence I had expected from a confrontation between predators and prey. Nora Whitfield moved the way water moves around stones, efficient and unhurried, and within moments, Torvek had joined the others, gone from that street as completely as if he had never been there at all. That left only me. I stood frozen at the edge of the maintenance district, my back pressed against the cool metal wall of the nearest warehouse, watching Nora Whitfield turn to face me, across a distance that suddenly felt impossibly small. My heart hammered against my ribs so loudly I was certain she could hear it from where she stood, and every instinct bred into my species over countless generations screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something, anything, other than simply stand there waiting for whatever came next. I did not run. I could not seem to make my legs cooperate with that particular instruction. Nora Whitfield walked toward me slowly, her canvas bag still resting against her hip, as though nothing unusual had happened at all, as though the previous several minutes had been an ordinary walk home rather than the complete unraveling of everything my pack believed about our place in the universe. "You tried to warn them," she said, stopping a few paces away, close enough that I could see the storm-gray color of her eyes clearly in the fading evening light. "Twice, actually. Once last night, in your dormitory, though you never said it out loud, and once tonight, on this street." I opened my mouth, though I had no idea what words might come out. Nothing did. My throat had closed around whatever explanation or apology I might have offered, leaving only silence between us. "I could smell your hesitation the entire walk here," she continued. "You were the only one whose heartbeat changed when your pack leader gave the order. Fear does that. Guilt does that too, sometimes, when you know something is wrong, but you do not yet have the courage to say so." "I am sorry," I finally managed, the words barely above a whisper. "I should have said something. I should have stopped this before it started." Nora Whitfield tilted her head, studying me with an expression I could not quite read, something between curiosity and consideration, as though she were weighing a decision she had not yet fully made. "Where I come from," she said, "we have a saying, the ones who hesitate before doing something wrong are not the same as the ones who never hesitate at all. It does not excuse what happened here tonight, but it does mean something." "What happens to me now?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how far it was from the confident tone I had carried into that classroom on the very first day I noticed her sitting 2 rows behind me. "Nothing happens to you," she said, "not tonight." I blinked, certain I had misheard her. "Nothing?" "You are going to walk back to your dormitory," she said, "and you are going to think very carefully about everything you witnessed here. And tomorrow, when people start asking questions about where your packmates have gone, you are going to have a choice to make about what kind of hunter you want to be for the rest of your life." She turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at me over her shoulder with an expression that carried something almost like sympathy. "For what it is worth," she said, "you were right to hesitate last night. You should trust that instinct more often. It might save your life someday. It may have saved it tonight." Then she walked away, down the quiet street toward the transit station, her footsteps calm and unhurried, exactly the same rhythm they had carried since the moment we first began following her from the east entrance of the academy. I stood alone in the darkness for a long time after she disappeared from sight, surrounded by an emptiness that felt far larger than the simple absence of 4 packmates. The streetlights hummed faintly overhead. The warehouse walls creaked with the settling cold of evening, and somewhere in that silence I finally understood how completely wrong my entire pack had been about what we thought we understood regarding predators, prey, and the terrible, quiet difference between the two. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the empty common room where we had gathered only 24 hours earlier, staring at 4 cups still sitting on the low table exactly where Vhorn, Sella, Drake, and the others had left them, and I waited for morning to arrive with a dread that settled deep into my bones and never fully left. Sunrise came slowly that day, gray light creeping across the dormitory windows in a way that felt almost cruel after a night spent replaying the same terrible minutes over and over in my mind. By the time the first proper rays of daylight reached the common room floor, I had convinced myself of at least 3 different explanations for what happened, each one more desperate than the last, each one collapsing the moment I tried to make it fit the facts. The knock on the door came just after the sun cleared the eastern buildings. It was Professor Aldrich Kane, our xenobiology instructor and the PAC's academic advisor, a tall, weathered man with silver hair and the kind of tired patience that comes from decades spent managing students, far more dangerous than himself. He stood in the doorway with a data tablet in one hand and an expression I had never seen on him before, somewhere between confusion and genuine alarm. "Kesthera," he said, "I need you to come with me. Now, if you would." I followed him down the corridor without asking questions, though 100 of them crowded behind my teeth, each one fighting to be spoken first. The academy halls felt different in the early morning light, quieter than usual, though I noticed small clusters of staff members gathered near the administrative offices, speaking in low, urgent tones that stopped whenever a student walked past. Professor Kane led me into a small conference room near the main administrative wing, where 2 other staff members already waited, along with a security officer I recognized vaguely from campus patrols. Nobody spoke as I took the seat offered to me, and the silence pressed against my ears until I thought I might scream simply to break it. "Where is Vorn?" Professor Kane finally asked. "And the rest of your pack? Sella, Drakes Torvek, Ilsara? Nobody has seen any of them since yesterday afternoon." I felt every muscle in my body go rigid, and I am certain the staff members in that room noticed, because Professor Kane's expression shifted immediately from concern to something sharper, more focused. "You know something," he said. It was not a question. I thought about lying. I want to be honest about that, even now, even years later. I thought about constructing some story where the pack had simply gone on an unauthorized excursion or gotten lost exploring the maintenance district, some explanation that would buy time and avoid the conversation I knew was coming. But something about the weight of the previous night, the memory of Torvek's trembling hands and Ilsara's footsteps stopping too soon, made lying feel impossible. "We followed a student after class yesterday," I said, and once I began speaking, the words came faster than I could control them. "A human transfer student, Nora Whitfield. Warren wanted to intimidate her. He thought she was disrespecting the pack by not showing appropriate fear." The security officer exchanged a quick glance with Professor Kane, an exchange loaded with meaning I did not yet understand. "Continue," Professor Kane said quietly. "I told them everything. The confrontation on the empty street near the warehouses, Warren's lunge and the impossible speed with which it had been turned against him, Sella's fall, Drake's charge into the warehouse wall, Torvek's final, quiet plea and the strange, gentle way it had been answered, Ilsara's attempt to flee and the silence that followed her footsteps. I described Nora Whitfield's calm, unhurried demeanor throughout the entire encounter, the complete absence of fear or aggression in her voice, even as my packmates disappeared around her one by one. By the time I finished, the room had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that carries its own particular weight. "You are certain of this account," the security officer finally said, "every detail." "I am certain," I said. "I was standing there. I watched it happen." Professor Kane set down his data tablet and rubbed his eyes with one weathered hand, an old, human gesture he had picked up during his years studying alongside faculty from Earth-affiliated institutions. When he looked back at me, something in his expression had changed, hardened into a kind of resigned understanding that I did not yet share. "Kesthara," he said, "how much do you actually know about human transfer students? Specifically, about the ones who come from Earth, rather than from the established colony worlds?" "They are considered a moderate-risk species," I said, reciting the ranking I had memorized during my first year at the academy, the same ranking every predatory species learned as part of basic interspecies education. Physically unremarkable compared to most listed predators, below average in most direct combat metrics. Notable primarily for adaptability and technological development rather than physical capability. That ranking, Professor Kane said slowly, was compiled using data from human colonists who left Earth several generations ago, raised in controlled environments with limited exposure to genuine survival pressure. It has almost nothing to do with students who transfer directly from certain regions of Earth itself, where conditions remain considerably less forgiving than anywhere else currently inhabited by a spacefaring species. I stared at him, uncomprehending. I do not understand. There is a reason certain files regarding direct Earth transfers are restricted from general student access, he continued. Earth is, by every meaningful ecological measurement available to us, one of the most dangerous inhabited worlds ever surveyed by any spacefaring civilization. Predator density that rivals or exceeds anything found on the Deathworlds your own species evolved alongside. Environmental volatility. Disease pressure, unlike anything experienced by species that developed under more stable conditions. And most importantly, an evolutionary history defined almost entirely by humanity's ability to survive and eventually dominate that environment, not through raw physical superiority, but through something considerably harder to measure and considerably more dangerous to underestimate. The security officer leaned forward slightly. Every generation, a small number of students transferred directly from certain regions of Earth rather than from established human colonies. Their files are flagged, their behavior is monitored, quietly, without their knowledge, because institutions that host them have learned, over time, exactly what can happen when other species mistake ordinary caution for weakness. "Are you telling me," I said slowly, the pieces beginning to arrange themselves into a shape I did not want to see clearly, that Nora Whitfield is one of these flagged students? Professor Kane tapped something on his data tablet and turned it to face me. A profile appeared, sparse and heavily redacted, most of the personal details blacked out entirely, but the flag at the top of the document was unmistakable, a small red marker that I now understood meant something entirely different than I had assumed only moments before. She transferred from a region categorized under our systems as extreme survival conditions, he said. Her full file is restricted even from faculty access above a certain security threshold. What little we do know suggests she comes from a lineage with generations of experience surviving environments that would kill most trained predators within days, using methods that rely far more on patience, adaptability, and precise economical action than raw strength or aggression. Then where are Vhorn and the others? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Where did they go? Nobody in that room had an answer for me, not truly, though the security officer eventually admitted that campus monitoring near the maintenance district had captured partial footage from the previous evening, footage that ended abruptly at the same location I had described, with all 5 members of my pack visible entering the frame and only myself visible leaving it several minutes later. "We are opening a full investigation," Professor Kane said. "You will need to remain available for further questioning. And Kesthara, I want you to understand something clearly, because I do not think you currently do." "What is that?" I asked. "You survived last night," he said, "not because you were less of a threat than your packmates, and not through any particular skill or advantage. You survived because you hesitated. Because some part of you recognized, even without fully understanding why, that something about that confrontation did not fit the patterns you had been taught to trust. That instinct, small and quiet as it was, is very likely the only reason you are sitting in this chair right now instead of missing alongside the rest of your pack." I left that meeting hours later, walking back across the quiet campus grounds under a sky that had turned a soft, ordinary blue, birds calling from the trees along the pathway as though nothing unusual had happened at all, as though 4 members of my hunting pack had not simply vanished from existence sometime during the previous night. Classes resumed as scheduled that morning, though a strange, uneasy energy moved through the hallways, whispered conversations trailing off whenever I walked past, curious and fearful glances following me between periods. I did not attend xenobiology that day. I could not make myself walk into that classroom and see the empty seats where Vhorn and Sella once sat, could not make myself sit 2 rows in front of the seat where Nora Whitfield always arrived early, wrote quietly in her paper notebook, and asked questions with an intelligence I now understood I had badly underestimated. I did not see her again that entire week. When I finally worked up the courage to check the Academy's student directory, searching for her name simply to confirm she still attended classes at all, I found her enrollment record intact, unchanged, showing regular attendance in every course, including the one I had been too afraid to attend myself. Whatever had happened on that quiet street near the warehouses, whatever had become of Vuhorn and Sella and Drake and Torvik and Ilsara, Nora Whitfield herself had continued attending classes the very next morning, as though nothing at all had occurred. That, more than anything else, was what finally convinced me how badly my entire pack had misjudged her from the very beginning. Many years have passed since that evening near the warehouses, enough that I now hold a research position at the very academy where I once ran with a hunting pack that believed itself untouchable. I study interspecies behavior now, rather than practicing the old traditions of intimidation and dominance my lineage once valued above almost everything else. People sometimes ask me why I changed paths so completely, and for a long time I gave them careful, incomplete answers, unwilling to revisit the details of that night in any real depth. I am ready now to tell the fuller truth, because I believe it matters, and because I believe other young hunters deserve to understand what I did not understand until it cost me almost everything I valued. The investigation into my packmate's disappearance continued for several months after that morning in the conference room, though it produced remarkably little in the way of concrete answers. Campus security reviewed every available piece of footage from the night in question, interviewed dozens of students and staff members, and even brought in specialists from outside the academy to analyze the partial recordings from the maintenance district. Nothing conclusive ever emerged. No bodies were found. No distress signals were ever traced. No evidence of any lasting harm surfaced anywhere in the surrounding region, despite extensive searching. Eventually, quietly, without any formal announcement, the case was reclassified from an active investigation to an unresolved disappearance, the kind of designation reserved for situations that institutions prefer not to examine too closely once it becomes clear that continued examination will not produce answers anyone particularly wants to hear. I understood, even then, that the true explanation existed somewhere just beyond what the official investigation was willing to pursue. It took me nearly 3 years of careful, patient research to piece together even a partial understanding of what Nora Whitfield truly represented that night. Research conducted quietly, without official sanction, using every academic resource available to me as I worked toward my own advanced studies in interspecies behavioral analysis. What I eventually learned reshaped almost everything I thought I understood about predator and prey classifications across known space. Every spacefaring civilization that eventually made contact with humanity's scattered colonies made the same fundamental mistake, one so consistent across dozens of independent first encounters that it almost seemed built into the structure of how other species processed threat assessment. Humans were physically unremarkable by nearly every direct measurement available. Modest strength compared to true apex predator species. Ordinary speed. No natural weapons to speak of. No claws. No venom. No size advantage against most of the creatures that had historically hunted them across their own world's long, brutal evolutionary history. And yet, across every recorded encounter between humanity and species that considered themselves naturally superior predators, a strange and consistent pattern emerged. Humans, particularly those who came from regions of Earth where survival still demanded constant vigilance, consistently outperformed every predictive model built to assess their capabilities. The scientists studying this pattern eventually arrived at an explanation that reshaped the entire field of interspecies threat classification, though the full details remained restricted for years afterward, shared only among researchers who had already demonstrated sufficient understanding of the underlying principles. Most predatory species, across most inhabited worlds, evolved their capabilities in relative isolation, developing specialized advantages, claws, size, venom, speed, that allowed them to dominate whatever ecological niche they eventually claimed. Once a species reached the top of its local food chain, evolutionary pressure toward further adaptation slowed considerably. Why continue developing new survival strategies when existing ones already worked well enough to guarantee dominance? Earth had never allowed its inhabitants that particular luxury. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, humans occupied a precarious position within their own ecosystem. Neither the largest, nor the fastest, nor the most naturally dangerous creatures competing for the same limited resources across a planet that offered remarkably little forgiveness for miscalculation. Surrounded by predators considerably better equipped for direct confrontation, humans survived and eventually flourished not through any single overwhelming physical advantage, but through an accumulated combination of adaptability, cooperation, patience, and a willingness to study, understand, and eventually outmaneuver threats that could not be matched through strength alone. Generation after generation, that pressure shaped something in humanity that no simple ranking system could adequately measure. Not raw physical capability, but something considerably harder to quantify and considerably more dangerous to underestimate. A kind of calm, practiced competence under pressure that emerged specifically because humans had spent countless generations learning to survive situations where panic meant death and careful, decisive action meant survival. Most humans living comfortable lives across established colonies, generations removed from the environments that shaped their ancestors, never needed to develop that particular quality to any significant degree. But certain regions of Earth itself, even in more recent generations, continued to demand it, shaping individuals who carried within them an inherited, practiced calm that had nothing to do with courage in the way most species understood the term, and everything to do with a kind of deep, functional competence built through generations of genuine necessity. Nora Whitfield, I eventually learned through careful, patient research, came from exactly such a lineage. Her transfer file, once I finally gained sufficient clearance to review a more complete version, described a childhood spent in a coastal region of Earth known for unpredictable severe weather patterns, limited infrastructure, and a long tradition of self-reliant communities that had maintained certain physical and practical training practices across many generations, long after most of the developed world had moved away from such traditions entirely. Her family history included several generations of individuals trained extensively in practical self-defense, wilderness survival, and what the file vaguely described as community protection responsibilities. Details deliberately kept sparse to protect both her privacy and, I eventually understood, the broader pattern that institutions preferred outside species not fully appreciate. She had grown up, in other words, in circumstances that demanded exactly the kind of calm, practiced competence that had made my entire pack's confident assumptions so completely, dangerously wrong. I never learned the full details of what happened to Vahorn, Sela, Draic, Torvek, and Ilsara that night. I want to be honest about that, even now. I have my theories, developed over years of careful study and quiet reflection, and I believe strongly that whatever happened to them, they were not permanently harmed in the way my worst fears once suggested. Certain patterns in the restricted files I eventually gained access to suggested a long-standing, quiet arrangement between institutions hosting Earth transfer students and certain specialized organizations dedicated to managing situations exactly like the one my pack created that evening. Organizations equipped to remove genuine threats from campus environments without resorting to permanent harm, instead relocating them to specialized facilities designed to help predatory species reconsider certain assumptions about their place in the broader universe. I choose to believe, and everything I have learned across years of careful research supports this belief, that my packmates are alive somewhere, having been given, in their own way, precisely the lesson Vaughan originally intended to give Nora Whitfield, delivered instead by people considerably more prepared to teach it properly. I saw Nora Whitfield exactly once more before she completed her studies and returned to Earth several years after that night near the warehouses. It was during a research symposium hosted by the Academy, one I attended as a graduate researcher rather than a student, presenting early findings from my ongoing study into interspecies threat perception and the dangerous consequences of relying too heavily on incomplete predatory rankings. She approached me afterward, during the reception that followed my presentation, looking very much the same as she had all those years earlier, calm, quietly observant, carrying herself with the same unhurried confidence I remembered so vividly from that terrible evening. "Your research is good," she said, without preamble, the same direct manner I remembered from our very first encounter. "Better than good, actually. Most predatory species never bother examining their own assumptions this carefully." "I had considerable motivation," I said, and something in my tone must have carried more weight than I intended, because her expression softened slightly, the same subtle shift I remembered from the night she chose to let me go. "I am sorry about your pack," she said. "I want you to know that. I did not enjoy what happened that night. I want you to understand that as well." "I believe you," I said, and found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I meant it completely. "You have changed a great deal since then," she said, glancing briefly toward the presentation materials still displayed at the front of the conference hall. "Most predators, who lose packmates, the way you did, either abandon their studies entirely or spend the rest of their lives seeking some form of retribution. You chose neither path." "I chose to understand," I said. "It seemed more useful than either alternative." She smiled at that, a small, genuine expression that felt entirely different from anything I had seen from her during our original encounter. That is, I think, exactly the right lesson to have taken from all of this. Most species assume understanding a threat means learning how to overpower it. The species that actually survive long-term are usually the ones who learn something considerably more valuable instead. "What is that?" I asked. "How to recognize when they were never truly in a position of advantage to begin with," she said, "and how to adjust their behavior accordingly, before that misunderstanding costs them something they cannot get back." We spoke for a while longer that evening, about her studies, about my research, about the strange, complicated relationship between species that had spent generations building elaborate rankings meant to measure danger using metrics that consistently failed to capture what actually mattered most. She left the Academy shortly afterward, returning to Earth to continue whatever training and responsibilities awaited her within her own community, and I have not seen her since, though I sometimes wonder what became of her, whether she eventually settled into some quiet, ordinary life, or whether the calm, practiced competence I witnessed that night continued serving some larger purpose within whatever organization eventually recognized and cultivated it. I think of that evening often, more often than I probably should, given how many years have now passed. I think of Vahorn's confident certainty as he lunged forward, absolutely convinced that generations of successful hunts across a dozen worlds guaranteed the same outcome against a quiet transfer student who took notes in a paper notebook and asked precise, thoughtful questions during lecture. I think of Sella's careful, measured approach, trained through years of tournament competition, undone so completely and so quickly by someone who had never once competed in any formal combat tradition our species recognized. I think of Drake's overwhelming physical confidence, built on genuine size and strength advantages that meant absolutely nothing against someone who understood, far better than we did, exactly how to turn an opponent's greatest strength into their greatest liability. Mostly, though, I think of my own hesitation, that small, quiet voice I nearly ignored entirely, the one that recognized something wrong long before my conscious mind fully understood what it was recognizing. I have come to believe, across years of study and reflection, that this particular instinct, the willingness to question comfortable assumptions before they lead to irreversible mistakes, may be the single most important quality any predatory species can develop, considerably more valuable than any physical advantage evolution ever provided. I teach my own students this lesson now. Every year, in the very same xenobiology classroom where Nora Whitfield once sat quietly, 2 rows behind where I used to sit myself. I tell them about rankings and statistics, about claws and speed and size, because these things do matter, and ignoring them entirely would be its own kind of dangerous mistake. But I also tell them about that quiet street near the maintenance district, about an ordinary-looking transfer student who never raised her voice, never showed any sign of fear, and calmly, methodically demonstrated exactly how incomplete our understanding of danger truly was. I tell them to trust their hesitation. I tell them that confidence built entirely on historical success can become its own kind of blindness, especially when facing something whose true nature refuses to fit neatly into whatever chart or ranking they have been taught to trust without question. And I tell them, always, at the very end of every lesson, exactly what I learned that night beneath the flickering streetlights of an empty campus street, watching 4 confident, capable hunters disappear, one by one, into the gathering darkness. Some of the most dangerous creatures across the known universe do not announce themselves through size, or claws, or aggressive display. Some of them simply sit quietly near the back of an ordinary classroom, taking careful notes, asking thoughtful questions, and waiting patiently to see whether anyone around them will be foolish enough to test exactly how far their calm, unassuming patience truly extends. By sunrise, every hunter who tested that patience had disappeared. I was the only one who survived to understand why.